January 11th, 1945. 9:02 a.m. Northern Luzon, Philippines. 6.50 caliber machine guns roared to life. The first Japanese Tony fighter exploded in mid-air, its fuselage ripping apart like paper torn by invisible hands. Pieces of wing and metal tumbled through the formation. Before the debris even hit the ground, a second burst of gunfire found its mark. Another Tony burst into flames and spiraled toward the earth below. 2 kills in 3 seconds. The pilot behind those guns was not a decorated ace. He was not a legendary fighter pilot whose name appeared in newspapers back home. He was a former undertaker from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A man who had spent 203 combat missions watching other pilots become heroes while he photographed empty beaches and bombed supply dumps. A man who had seen exactly 1 enemy aircraft in his entire military career until 24 hours ago. Now, William Shomo was staring at 17 Japanese planes directly above him. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio waiting for orders. Every tactical manual, every piece of training, every ounce of common sense screamed the same thing. Do not engage. But Shomo had waited 3 years for this moment. And in the next 6 minutes, this rookie would destroy 7 enemy aircraft, earn the Medal of Honor, and leave Japanese command, stunned at what one American pilot could accomplish against impossible odds. The Pacific War in early 1945 was reaching its most critical phase. American forces had landed at Lingayen Gulf on January 9th, beginning the liberation of the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur's promise to return was being fulfilled, but the cost was staggering. Japanese forces still controlled much of northern Luzon. An estimated 300 enemy fighters operated from airfields at Tuguegarao, Apari, and Lawag. Every day, American bombers and transport aircraft faced the constant threat of interception. Every day, pilots died. The reconnaissance squadrons faced a particular problem that nobody seemed willing to address. Their job was to fly deep into enemy territory, photograph Japanese positions, and return with intelligence that could save thousands of lives. Simple mission on paper. Suicide mission in reality. The aircraft assigned to reconnaissance squadrons were obsolete. P-39 Ira Cobras and P-40 Warhawks. These planes had one fatal flaw: range. The P-39 could fly approximately 525 miles total. That meant 260 miles out and 260 miles back with almost nothing in reserve. Japanese airfields sat beyond that radius. Rabal Truk Wewak. All completely out of reach for a P-39 pilot hoping to encounter enemy fighters. The reconnaissance pilots could photograph territory that American forces already controlled. They could strafe trucks and barges that posed no aerial threat. They could do everything except the one thing fighter pilots dreamed about: actual aerial combat. Meanwhile, the P-38 Lightning squadrons and P-47 Thunderbolt squadrons were racking up victories. Richard Bong was becoming America's ace of aces. Tommy Maguire was closing in on legendary status. Gerald Johnson's name appeared in dispatches across the Pacific Theater. These men flew aircraft with the range to reach Japanese airspace. They flew missions where combat was expected, likely almost guaranteed. The reconnaissance pilots flew missions where seeing an enemy aircraft was statistically improbable. Month after month, the frustration built. Skilled pilots trained for aerial combat stuck photographing empty beaches, while other men became legends. But everything was about to change because of one man nobody expected anything from. William Shomo grew up in Jeannette, Pennsylvania, a small town where opportunities were limited and expectations were modest. Before the war, he worked as an undertaker. He attended the Cincinnati College of Embalming and the Pittsburgh School of Embalming. He knew how to prepare bodies for burial. He understood death intimately, professionally, clinically. When the war began, Shomo wanted to fly fighters. He wanted aerial combat, the romance of dogfighting, the chance to become an ace. In August 1941, he enlisted in the aviation cadet program with dreams of glory. What he got was reconnaissance. The 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron needed pilots, and Shomo was assigned there without consultation or appeal. In early 1943, the squadron deployed to New Guinea. For 16 months, Shomo flew mission after mission in aircraft that could never reach areas where Japanese fighters operated. 16 months of photographing enemy positions, 16 months of strafing ground targets, 16 months of watching his skills rust while other pilots accumulated victories. He was 26 years old. 203 combat missions, 1 aerial victory. That single kill came on January 10, 1945, when he spotted a Japanese Val dive bomber attempting to land at Tuguegarao airfield. Shomo closed in from behind. The enemy pilot never saw him coming. One burst from 6.50 caliber machine guns. The Val went down in flames. After 202 missions of nothing, Shomo finally had a kill. But it felt hollow. Shooting down a bomber while it was landing was not fighter combat. It was target practice. That night, Shomo could not sleep. He kept thinking about what might happen the next day. What if he saw more enemy aircraft? What if the opportunity came again? What if he finally got the aerial combat he had been waiting for since 1941? In December 1944, Shomo's world transformed. The squadron received new aircraft, F-6D Mustangs. These were P-51 Mustangs modified for armed photo reconnaissance, with cameras mounted in the fuselage and 6.50 caliber machine guns retained. Most importantly, they had range. The F-6D could fly over 900 miles on internal fuel, with drop tanks over 1,400 miles. For the first time in 3 years, Shomo had an aircraft capable of reaching Japanese airspace and returning home. The P-51 was the finest fighter aircraft in the Pacific Theater. Top speed around 437 miles per hour. Superior dive performance. Devastating firepower. Better than anything the Japanese could put in the air. But technical specifications meant nothing without the pilot skills to use them. Shomo had those skills. 3 years of frustrated preparation. 3 years of studying tactics while stuck in obsolete aircraft. 3 years of analyzing gun camera footage from successful pilots, learning their techniques, memorizing their approaches. He knew deflection shooting. He knew energy management. He knew how to maintain situational awareness during high-speed maneuvering. He had every piece of theoretical knowledge a fighter pilot needed. He had simply never had the opportunity to apply it. On December 24, 1944, Shomo took command of the squadron. He was now responsible for leading missions, planning routes, assigning targets. He moved his men to Mindoro on January 1, 1945, positioning them to support the Lingayen Gulf landings. The stage was set. The aircraft was ready. The pilot was ready. All that remained was the moment itself. January 11, 1945 began as another routine mission. Check 3 Japanese airfields at Tuguegarao, Apari, and Laoag. Document enemy air strength. Return with intelligence. Shomo's wingman was Lieutenant Paul Lipscomb, a 23-year-old pilot new to combat but skilled in formation flying. They launched at 7:32 a.m. and headed north at 500 feet below Japanese radar coverage. Standard procedure for reconnaissance missions. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, ideal conditions for photography. At approximately 9 o'clock a.m. Shomo looked up and felt his heart stop. 2,000 feet above them, flying south, coming directly toward them. A formation of Japanese aircraft. He counted quickly. Fighters. Many fighters. And 1 twin-engine bomber. A Mitsubishi G4M. Betty, with an escort of 16 Kawasaki Ki 61 Tonys and 1 Nakajima Ki 44 Tojo. 17 Japanese aircraft total. The Betty was obviously carrying something important. Someone important. No commander would assign 16 fighters to escort a routine transport. This was a high-value target, and Shomo had exactly two choices. He could stay low, stay undetected, let them pass, complete his photo mission, and go home safely. Nobody would question that decision. 2 against 17 was not courage, it was suicide. Or he could attack. Shomo keyed his radio. His voice was steady when he told Lipscomb they were engaging. He did not wait for acknowledgement. He pulled the Mustang into a climbing Immelman turn, and the die was cast. The Japanese formation maintained course and speed, completely unaware of the threat climbing beneath them. The enemy pilots were relaxed. Some had even opened their canopies to enjoy the morning air. They expected no opposition this deep in Japanese-controlled territory. They were wrong. Shomo completed the Immelman and rolled out directly behind the enemy formation. Less than 40 yards separation, point-blank range. The Japanese pilots still had not reacted. Some actually waved, mistaking the Mustangs for friendly fighters joining the escort. Then Shomo opened fire. The leader of the trailing element exploded instantly. 6.50 caliber guns at 40 yards left nothing to chance. The Tony simply ceased to exist. Before the debris finished falling, Shomo shifted aim. Second burst. Second explosion. 2 kills in 3 seconds. Now, the Japanese knew they were under attack. The neat formation dissolved into chaos. Pilots scattered in every direction. Some turned left, some turned right, some dove, some climbed. No coordination, no tactical response. Just panic. Shomo went after the second element from the left side. Third kill. The Tony exploded and dropped from the sky. He moved to the opposite side. Fourth kill. Another fireball. The Betty bomber was diving away trying to escape while its escorts died around it. Shomo inverted into a split S and came up underneath the bomber where no defensive guns could reach. One burst into the belly. The Betty caught fire and began its death spiral. Fifth kill. A Tojo locked onto Shomo's tail, firing desperately. Shomo pulled into a tight vertical spiral. The Mustang could outturn the Tojo at low speed. The Japanese pilot stalled out and fell away into the clouds. The Betty hit the ground and exploded. The 2 Tony escorts broke away from the wreckage, running for their lives. Shomo caught the first one at 300 feet. Sixth kill. He dove lower nearly at ground level and caught the second. Seventh kill. 6 minutes. 7 Japanese aircraft destroyed. The former Undertaker from Pittsburgh had just become an ace in a single mission. When Shomo landed at Mindoro, he performed 7 victory rolls over the airfield. The ground crews watched in disbelief. Nobody did 7 victory rolls. 3 was exceptional. 4 was extraordinary. 7 was impossible. The gun camera footage confirmed everything. Every kill documented. Every maneuver recorded. Combined with Lipscomb's 3 victories, 10 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed in 6 minutes. Only the second American pilot ever to score 7 or more confirmed kills in a single mission. But this was only the beginning, because somewhere in Japanese command officers were reading the report from the 3 pilots who escaped. 17 aircraft attacked by 2 American fighters. 10 destroyed, and the questions were already forming. Who was this pilot? How had he accomplished the impossible? And most importantly, could he do it again? In Part 2, we will discover how Japanese intelligence scrambled to understand what happened over northern Luzon. We will witness the Medal of Honor ceremony that recognized Shomo's extraordinary achievement. And we will learn the real reason that Betty Bomber was so heavily escorted, a secret so valuable that its loss changed Japanese strategy in the Philippines forever. The Undertaker had just announced himself to the world. But the war was far from over. 6 minutes. 7 kills. 1 pilot who should have been dead 10 times over. In Part 1, we witnessed William Shomo, a former Undertaker from Pittsburgh, attack 17 Japanese aircraft with only his wingman at his side. We watched him destroy 7 enemy fighters and bombers, in what became one of the most devastating aerial engagements of the Pacific War. But shooting down enemy aircraft was only half the battle. Now Shomo faced an enemy he never expected, his own command. Because when he landed at Mindoro and reported 10 enemy aircraft destroyed, the response was not congratulations. It was disbelief. 7 kills in one mission, from a reconnaissance pilot with only one previous victory. The officers at 5th Air Force Headquarters thought it was a joke. Or worse, a lie. The gun camera footage was being developed, but until those images proved his claims, William Shomo was not a hero. He was a pilot making impossible claims that threatened to embarrass the entire command structure. And this is where everything became complicated. Colonel James Bradley had commanded air operations in the Philippines for 18 months. He had seen pilots exaggerate their claims before. He had seen gun camera footage that showed 3 kills when the pilot reported 5. He had learned to trust numbers only after verification, and verification took time. When Shomo's mission report landed on his desk, Bradley read it twice. Then he called his intelligence officer into the room. The conversation was brief and pointed. A reconnaissance pilot with 203 missions and 1 confirmed kill suddenly destroys 7 aircraft in 6 minutes against a formation of 17 enemy planes. With a wingman who claims 3 more, Bradley had been in the military long enough to recognize fantasy when he saw it. He ordered the gun camera footage expedited. He wanted answers within 24 hours. Meanwhile, Shomo was to be confined to quarters. Not arrested, not accused. Simply confined until the truth could be established. Shomo sat in his tent that night replaying the combat in his mind. Every maneuver, every burst of gunfire, every explosion. He knew what he had done. He knew Lipscomb had witnessed everything. But knowing and proving were different things entirely. The military ran on documentation. Without that gun camera footage, his word meant nothing. Outside his tent, he could hear other pilots talking. Some believed him. Some thought he had cracked under pressure and imagined the whole thing. Some wondered if he had simply counted wrong in the chaos of combat. 3 kills was plausible. 5 was exceptional. 7 was absurd. No reconnaissance pilot achieved 7 kills in a single mission. That simply did not happen. The hours crawled past. Shomo did not sleep. He kept thinking about the footage in that developing lab. Everything depended on images captured by a small camera mounted behind his guns. If the footage was clear, he was a hero. If it was damaged or inconclusive, he was a liar. His entire career, his entire reputation hung on chemical reactions happening in a darkroom somewhere on the base. But what Shomo did not know was that he had already found an ally. Major Thomas Whitfield had served as 5th Air Force intelligence officer for 2 years. He had analyzed hundreds of combat reports and thousands of feet of gun camera footage. He knew what real combat looked like on film. He also knew what fabrication looked like. When he began reviewing Shomo's footage at 0600 hours on January 12th, he expected to find discrepancies, exaggerations, the usual pilot optimism that turned probable kills into confirmed victories. What he found instead made him stop the projector and start over from the beginning. The footage was pristine. Clear images of Japanese aircraft filling the frame at impossibly close range. The first Tony exploding, pieces of wing and fuselage tumbling away. The second Tony catching fire and falling. Kill after kill after kill, each one documented in crisp detail that left no room for doubt. Whitfield watched the footage 3 times. Then he called Colonel Bradley directly. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Bradley was in the screening room within 10 minutes. He watched the footage himself. Then he watched it again. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. He had been wrong. Shomo had done exactly what he claimed. The colonel ordered Shomo released from confinement immediately. He also ordered a full tactical analysis of the engagement. If one pilot could achieve these results, 5th Air Force needed to understand exactly how it happened. Because if they could replicate Shomo's success, they could change the entire air war over the Philippines. The tactical review began at 1400 hours on January 12th. Shomo stood before a room of senior officers' maps and photographs spread across a large table. He walked them through every moment of the engagement. The initial sighting at 0900 hours. The decision to attack despite 17-2 odds. The climbing Immelman turn that placed him directly behind the enemy formation. The point-blank range that guaranteed his shots would connect. The officers listened in silence. Some took notes. Some simply stared at the young captain who had accomplished what none of them believed possible. Colonel Bradley asked the first question. Why did you attack? Shomo's answer was simple. He had waited 3 years for aerial combat. When the opportunity appeared, he took it. The tactical advantages were clear. He had altitude. He had surprise. He had speed. The enemy formation did not know he was there until his guns were already firing. Another officer asked about the risk. 17-2 was suicide by any reasonable calculation. Shomo acknowledged the odds, but explained his reasoning. The Japanese pilots were relaxed, unprepared, focused on their escort mission. They were not expecting attack from below. By the time they realized the threat, 2 of their aircraft were already destroyed. Chaos favored the attacker. He had used that chaos perfectly. The analysis continued for 3 hours. Every maneuver was examined. Every tactical decision was evaluated. When it was finished, Bradley made an announcement that shocked everyone in the room. He was recommending William Shomo for the Medal of Honor. The room fell silent. The Medal of Honor was not given lightly. It required extraordinary gallantry above and beyond normal duty. It required actions that demonstrated exceptional courage under extreme circumstances. Attacking 17 enemy aircraft with only 1 wingman qualified, destroying 7 of them in 6 minutes more than qualified. But the recommendation was only the beginning. Word of Shomo's achievement spread rapidly through the Pacific Theater. By January 15th, pilots from other squadrons were arriving at Mindoro to hear the story firsthand. They wanted details. They wanted tactics. They wanted to know how a reconnaissance pilot with no real combat experience had accomplished what aces with dozens of victories could not match. Shomo answered their questions patiently. He described the approach, the range, the shooting technique. He explained how he had studied other pilots' gun camera footage for 3 years, learning their methods, memorizing their approaches. He had known exactly what to do when the moment arrived. The theoretical knowledge had become practical skill in 6 minutes of perfect execution. But knowledge sharing was only part of the challenge. 5th Air Force Command wanted to apply Shomo's tactics across all fighter squadrons. They wanted to train other pilots in his techniques. They wanted to replicate his success on a larger scale. The problem was convincing veteran pilots that a reconnaissance pilot had something to teach them. Major Richard Bong had 40 confirmed kills. Tommy McGuire had 38. These were legends of the Pacific Air War. They had developed their own tactics through years of combat experience. Why would they listen to a captain who had achieved his fame in a single mission? Shomo was assigned to brief fighter squadrons throughout the Philippines. His first session was at Clark Field on January 18th. The room was filled with experienced pilotsmen who had been fighting Japanese aircraft while Shomo was photographing beaches. Their skepticism was obvious. Shomo ignored it. He showed them his gun camera footage. He walked them through the tactical decisions. He explained the importance of surprise of close range of overwhelming firepower applied in the first seconds of engagement. Gradually, the skepticism faded. The footage was undeniable. The results were undeniable. These pilots recognized skill when they saw it. The tactical changes Shomo advocated began appearing in combat reports within weeks. Pilots who had previously engaged at long range started closing to point-blank distances. Pilots who had attacked enemy formations from above began experimenting with attacks from below. The kill ratios improved. Not dramatically at first, but noticeably. More Japanese aircraft were being destroyed. Fewer American pilots were being lost. The Shomo method, as some began calling it, was producing results. Japanese pilots noticed the change before their commanders did. American fighters were attacking with a new aggression, closing to ranges that seemed suicidal, but proved devastatingly effective. Escort missions that had once been routine became deadly. Transport aircraft that had traveled safely with fighter cover began disappearing. Something had shifted in American tactics, and Japanese aircrews were paying the price. By February 1945, Japanese air strength in the Philippines had declined by nearly 40%. Not all of that reduction came from Shomo-inspired tactics. American numerical superiority was overwhelming. But the efficiency of kills, the ratio of enemy aircraft destroyed to American aircraft lost, had improved significantly. Shomo's 6 minutes of combat were producing ripple effects across the entire theater. On April 3, 1945, Major General Ennis Whitehead pinned the Medal of Honor on William Shomo's chest during a ceremony on Luzon. The citation praised his extraordinary gallantry and intrepidity. It called his achievement unparalleled in the Southwest Pacific area. Shomo stood at attention while the general read the words aloud. He thought about the 3 years of waiting, the frustration of flying obsolete aircraft, the 203 missions where he never saw an enemy plane. All of it had led to 6 minutes that changed everything. But even as he accepted his nation's highest military honor, Shomo knew the war was not over. Japanese forces were still fighting. Pilots were still dying. And somewhere in Tokyo, intelligence officers were studying reports of the February 11th engagement, trying to understand what had happened over northern Luzon. The 3 Japanese pilots who escaped had told their story. 17 aircraft attacked, 10 destroyed in minutes. The American pilot had appeared from nowhere, attacked with impossible accuracy, and vanished before effective resistance could be organized. Japanese command wanted answers. They wanted countermeasures. They wanted to ensure that what happened to that escort formation could never happen again. In Part 3, we will discover how Japanese intelligence attempted to identify the pilot they called the Ghost of Luzon. We will witness the desperate countermeasures they developed to protect their remaining aircraft. And we will learn what happened when Shomo encountered enemy fighters one final time. A meeting that would test everything he had learned and prove whether his success was skill or simply extraordinary luck. The Medal of Honor ceremony marked the end of one chapter. But the most dangerous chapter was just beginning, from Undertaker to Ace in 6 minutes. In Part 1, William Shomo attacked 17 Japanese aircraft with only his wingman and destroyed 7 of them in the most devastating aerial engagement of his career. In Part 2, we watched him overcome skepticism from his own command, prove his claims with undeniable gun camera footage, and receive the Medal of Honor for extraordinary gallantry. His tactics spread throughout 5th Air Force. Kill ratios improved. Japanese losses mounted. But success on this scale does not go unnoticed. By February 1945, Japanese intelligence officers in Manila were studying every report from the January 11th engagement. They had a name now. They had a squadron. They had a target. And they were determined to ensure that what happened over northern Luzon would never happen again. This was no longer about one pilot and one mission. This had become a war within the war. The 3 Japanese pilots who escaped the January 11th massacre returned to Formosa with a story that their commanders refused to believe. 17 aircraft, 10 destroyed, 6 minutes. The numbers made no sense. Japanese fighter pilots were trained professionals. Their aircraft were capable machines. How could 2 American fighters achieve such devastating results against overwhelming odds? Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Yamamoto led the intelligence investigation. He interviewed the surviving pilots, repeatedly searching for inconsistencies, looking for exaggerations that might explain the impossible numbers. He found none. The pilots described the same attack from 3 different perspectives. The American had appeared from below, completely unexpected. He had closed to point-blank range before opening fire. His shooting was precise. Each burst found its target. Each target exploded or burned. There was no wasted ammunition, no missed shots, no hesitation. Yamamoto compiled his report with growing concern. This was not luck. This was not a single fortunate engagement. This was a pilot demonstrating tactical mastery that Japanese air doctrine had no answer for. The report went to Combined Fleet Headquarters on February 3rd. Within 48 hours, new orders reached every fighter squadron in the Philippines theater. Escort formations were to maintain constant vigilance below, as well as above. Aircraft were to fly in tighter formations with overlapping fields of observation. Any approaching aircraft, regardless of apparent nationality, was to be challenged before being allowed to join formation. The Japanese were adapting. They were learning from their losses. They were determined to kill the pilot they had begun calling Yurei the Ghost. But the adaptations created new problems for Japanese operations. Tighter formations meant less fuel efficiency. Constant vigilance meant exhausted pilots. Challenge protocols meant delays that disrupted mission timing. Every countermeasure designed to prevent another January 11th came with costs that weakened overall Japanese air capability. American intelligence noticed the changes within weeks. Japanese escort patterns had shifted. Transport missions were being delayed or canceled. Fighter squadrons that had operated aggressively were now flying defensively, protecting their formations instead of hunting for targets. Shomo's single engagement had achieved something that months of conventional combat could not. He had made the Japanese afraid. Fear changed behavior. Changed behavior reduced effectiveness. Reduced effectiveness meant more Japanese losses across every type of mission. The ripple effects extended far beyond what anyone had predicted. By late February, Japanese air strength in the Philippines had declined to approximately 180 operational aircraft, down from an estimated 300 in early January. Not all of that reduction came from the tactical changes inspired by Shomo. American numerical superiority was crushing. But the psychological impact was measurable in mission reports, in pilot interviews, in the defensive posture that had replaced Japanese aggression. But this was not the only challenge facing the American air campaign. The success of Shomo's tactics created unexpected problems when applied across multiple squadrons. Close-range engagement required exceptional pilot skill. Not every pilot possessed that skill. In the weeks following the tactical briefings, 5th Air Force recorded 7 incidents where American pilots attempted Shomo-style attacks and failed. 3 were shot down. 2 survived with damaged aircraft. 2 aborted their attacks when they realized they could not execute the maneuvers safely. The casualty reports landed on Colonel Bradley's desk with uncomfortable regularity. Each one represented a pilot who had tried to replicate what Shomo achieved and paid for the attempt with his life or his aircraft. Critics within the command structure began questioning the tactical changes. One exceptional pilot succeeds with aggressive tactics, they argued. That does not mean every pilot should attempt the same approach. Some men have gifts that cannot be taught. Shomo was one of them. Trying to mass-produce his results was getting good pilots killed. The criticism had merit. Shomo himself acknowledged the problem during a briefing on March 1st. Close-range engagement required 3 things: situational awareness to find the attack position, flying skill to execute the approach, shooting accuracy to destroy the target before the enemy could react. Most pilots had 1 or 2 of these abilities. Few had all 3. Forcing pilots to attempt tactics beyond their capabilities was counterproductive. The tactical doctrine was modified. Close-range engagement became an option rather than a requirement. Pilots with the necessary skills were encouraged to use Shomo's methods. Others were directed toward conventional tactics that matched their abilities. The adjustment reduced the casualty rate while preserving the benefits for pilots capable of executing the aggressive approach. But the controversy had damaged Shomo's reputation among some senior officers. They saw him as responsible for deaths that occurred when less skilled pilots tried to become heroes. March 15, 1945. Northern Luzon. Shomo climbed into the cockpit of his F-6D Mustang for what would become his final aerial encounter of the war. The mission was standard reconnaissance. Photograph Japanese positions near Baguio. Document troop movements. Return with intelligence for the upcoming ground offensive. His wingman was Lieutenant Robert Chen, a replacement pilot with 30 missions of experience. The weather was clear. Visibility unlimited. Perfect conditions for photography. Perfect conditions for combat. They crossed the coast at 0730 hours flying at 800 feet. Below them, the jungle stretched toward mountains still held by Japanese forces. Somewhere in that green expanse, enemy troops were preparing defenses that American infantry would soon have to breach. The photographs Shomo captured today could save hundreds of lives tomorrow. At 0847 hours, Chen's voice crackled through the radio. Aircraft. 11 o'clock high. 4 contacts. Shomo looked up. 4 Japanese fighters. Ki-84 Hayates. Frank and American designation. These were not the Tonys and Tojos of January 11th. The Hayate was Japan's finest fighter. Top speed over 420 miles per hour. Excellent climb rate. Heavy armament. 4 aircraft. 2 Mustangs. The odds were better than January 11th. But the opponents were more dangerous. Shomo assessed the tactical situation. The Japanese were at 3,000 feet heading south, apparently unaware of the 2 American fighters below them. Same scenario as January 11th. Same opportunity. But Shomo hesitated. Something felt wrong. The Japanese formation was too neat, too perfect, too obviously unaware of aircraft flying below them in broad daylight. He had studied Japanese countermeasures for weeks. He knew about the new vigilance protocols. He knew about the challenge procedures. And he knew that Japanese intelligence was hunting for him specifically. This could be a trap. Bait aircraft flying obvious patterns while hidden fighters waited for the American ghost to reveal himself. Shomo scanned the sky systematically. Nothing visible. No glint of sun on wings. No contrails at high altitude. No indication of additional aircraft. But absence of evidence was not evidence of absence. The Japanese had learned. They could be hiding. He keyed his radio, told Chen they were not engaging. The wingman acknowledged without question. They continued the reconnaissance mission. The 4 Japanese fighters flew south and disappeared. Shomo would never know if those aircraft were bait for a trap or simply an escort flight that failed to notice 2 Mustangs far below. He would never know if attacking would have given him 4 more victories or ended his life in an ambush he could not see coming. What he knew was this. Patience had kept him alive through 203 missions before January 11th. Patience would keep him alive now. The mission was reconnaissance. The mission was accomplished. 3 years of waiting had taught him when to fight and when to wait. That final encounter demonstrated something that the gun camera footage from January 11th could not capture. Judgment. The same pilot who attacked 17 aircraft chose not to attack 4. Both decisions were correct for their circumstances. That was the real lesson of William Shomo. The war ended 5 months later, August 15, 1945. Japanese surrender. The Pacific Air War was over. The final statistics told the story of what Shomo and pilots like him had accomplished. 5th Air Force claimed over 3,700 confirmed aerial victories during the war. Kill ratio exceeded 5-to-1 against Japanese aircraft. American air superiority was absolute by the final months. Within those numbers, Shomo's contribution appeared modest. 8 confirmed kills. 7 in one mission, 1 the day before. 44th among Pacific aces in total victories. But the statistics obscured the larger impact. The tactical changes he inspired had improved kill ratios across multiple squadrons. The psychological effect on Japanese operations had reduced enemy effectiveness for months. The example he set, patient preparation followed by perfect execution, had influenced pilot training doctrine throughout the theater. General George Kenney, commanding 5th Air Force, cited the January 11th engagement in his post-war memoirs as one of the most remarkable individual achievements of the Pacific Air Campaign. The Medal of Honor recognized extraordinary courage, but courage without skill produces only dead heroes. Shomo's achievement was the combination. 3 years of frustrated preparation had created capabilities that 6 minutes of combat revealed to the world. That preparation made the difference between attacking 17 aircraft and surviving versus attacking 17 aircraft and dying. Other pilots had courage. Shomo had courage and the skills to make courage effective. The lesson shaped American fighter tactics for decades after the war ended. Shomo returned to the United States in late 1945. He had been promoted to major. He had received his nation's highest military honor. He had achieved something that fewer than 20 American pilots accomplished during the entire war ace status in a single mission. But the celebrations faded. The parades ended. The newspaper stories moved on to new heroes and new conflicts. What happened to the man who changed aerial combat over the Philippines? What became of the Undertaker, who became a legend? In Part 4, we will follow William Shomo through the decades after his moment of glory. We will discover how the Medal of Honor shaped his post-war life. We will learn what he told interviewers when they asked about those 6 minutes over northern Luzon. And we will understand the true lesson that his story teaches, a lesson that has nothing to do with aircraft or tactics or kill ratios. The war made William Shomo famous. What he did with that fame reveals the man behind the legend. And that story has never been fully told. From Undertaker to Ace. From 203 missions without aerial combat to 7 kills in 6 minutes. From skepticism and confinement to the Medal of Honor. We have followed William Shomo through the most extraordinary day of his life and the months that followed. We watched him change aerial combat tactics across the Pacific Theater. We witnessed Japanese intelligence hunting for the pilot they called the Ghost of Luzon. We saw him demonstrate the judgment to not attack when circumstances demanded patience. The war ended, the celebrations faded. The newspaper headlines moved on to new stories and new heroes. But what happened to the man who proved that 3 years of frustrated preparation could become 6 minutes of perfect execution? The answer reveals something that medals and statistics cannot capture. Because William Shomo's greatest legacy was not what he did during the war. It was what he chose to do after it. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, Major William Shomo was stationed on Luzon. He had completed over 250 combat missions. He had destroyed 8 enemy aircraft. He wore the Medal of Honor around his neck and carried the weight of fame on his shoulders. The military offered him a choice. Return to civilian life with honors and recognition, or stay in uniform and continue serving. Shomo chose to stay. The Army Air Forces became the United States Air Force in 1947. Shomo transitioned to the new service without hesitation. He had found something during those years of war that undertaking in Pittsburgh could never provide: purpose, direction, a community that understood what combat demanded and what sacrifice meant. He rose through the ranks steadily. Lieutenant Colonel on February 20th, 1951. The Korean War brought new challenges and new conflicts, but Shomo was no longer flying combat missions. His role had shifted to training and leadership. The skills he had demonstrated over Luzon became lessons he taught to younger pilots facing different enemies in different skies. He retired in 1968 after 27 years of military service. 27 years since that morning in January 1945 when everything changed. He returned to Pennsylvania, returned to civilian life, returned to a world that had largely forgotten the name William Shomo, while remembering the names of pilots with more kills and more famous victories. In interviews during those later years, reporters asked him about January 11, 1945. They wanted drama. They wanted heroic language. They wanted the kind of story that made good television and sold magazines. Shomo gave them something different. He emphasized luck, timing, the right circumstances appearing at the right moment. He did not claim exceptional skill. He did not claim superior courage. He described himself as a pilot who got an opportunity and took it. Other pilots who studied his gun camera footage disagreed with that humble assessment. They saw precision shooting, perfect deflection angles, efficient ammunition management, situational awareness that bordered on supernatural. Those things were not luck. Those things were mastery applied under maximum pressure. But Shomo never claimed mastery. He never sought celebrity status. He never wrote memoirs or appeared on talk shows or capitalized on his fame. He simply lived his life, served his country, and let the record speak for itself. William Shomo died on June 25, 1990. He was 72 years old. He was buried in St. Clair Cemetery in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, the Medal of Honor accompanying him to his final rest. The undertaker had returned to the world of burial and remembrance this time as the one being remembered. But his legacy was not confined to that cemetery. The tactics William Shomo demonstrated on January 11, 1945, influenced American fighter doctrine for decades. Close-range engagement, attack from unexpected angles, overwhelming firepower applied in the first seconds of contact. These principles shaped how American pilots trained and fought through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The fundamental insight was simple but revolutionary. Aerial combat was not about prolonged dogfighting. It was about achieving a decisive advantage in the opening moments and exploiting that advantage before the enemy could recover. Shomo proved this with 7 kills in 6 minutes. Later generations of pilots proved it with missiles and radar and technology that Shomo could not have imagined. But the core principle remained unchanged. Surprise, position, overwhelming force. The mathematics of aerial combat supported what Shomo demonstrated intuitively. Studies conducted after the war showed that the pilot who achieved the first firing position won the engagement approximately 85% of the time. Getting into that position required exactly the skills Shomo had spent 3 years developing: situational awareness, energy management, patience to wait for the right moment, aggression to exploit it when it arrived. These principles transferred beyond aviation. Military strategists recognized that Shomo's approach applied to any combat situation where surprise and firepower could be combined. Special operations units adopted variations of his tactics. Training programs incorporated his gun camera footage as instructional material. The 6 minutes over northern Luzon became a case study taught at war colleges around the world. By conservative estimates, the tactical improvements influenced by Shomo's engagement and pilots like him saved thousands of American lives over subsequent decades. Kill ratios improved. Pilot survival rates increased. Missions that would have resulted in casualties became missions that achieved objectives with minimal losses. The undertaker from Pittsburgh had contributed something that outlasted his own lifetime by generations. The story of William Shomo teaches lessons that extend far beyond aerial combat. The first lesson is about preparation meeting opportunity. Shomo spent 3 years frustrated, stuck in obsolete aircraft, watching other pilots achieve glory while he photographed empty beaches. He could have become bitter. He could have stopped training, stopped studying, stopped preparing for a moment that might never come. Instead, he did the opposite. He analyzed gun camera footage from successful pilots. He studied tactics he might never use. He maintained peak readiness for an opportunity that seemed increasingly unlikely. When that opportunity finally appeared, he was ready. 3 years of invisible preparation became visible in 6 minutes of flawless execution. The second lesson is about institutional resistance to innovation. The military establishment initially doubted Shomo's claims. They confined him to quarters until evidence proved his story. Even after confirmation, some officers resisted the tactical changes he advocated. They preferred familiar approaches. They distrusted methods that came from an unknown reconnaissance pilot rather than established aces. This pattern repeats throughout military history. New ideas face skepticism. Outsiders face resistance. Innovation threatens existing hierarchies and comfortable assumptions. The individuals who change history are often those willing to push through that resistance to prove their ideas work to persist until the evidence becomes undeniable. The third lesson is about judgment. Shomo attacked 17 aircraft because the tactical situation favored attack. He declined to attack 4 aircraft because the situation was uncertain. Both decisions required courage. Both decisions demonstrated mastery. Knowing when to act and when to wait is perhaps the most difficult skill any leader can develop. Shomo developed it through 203 missions of patient observation. That patience paid dividends when it mattered most. Similar stories appear throughout World War II. Percy Spencer, a self-taught engineer, noticed that radar waves melted a chocolate bar in his pocket and invented the microwave oven. Charles Darrow, an unemployed salesman, created Monopoly during the Great Depression. Willis Carrier, a young engineer solving a humidity problem, invented air conditioning. In each case, preparation met opportunity. In each case, conventional thinking would have produced conventional results. The individuals who changed history were willing to see possibilities that others dismissed. There is one detail about January 11, 1945, that historians have puzzled over for decades. The Betty bomber that Shomo destroyed was carrying an unusually heavy fighter escort. 16 fighters for one transport aircraft. Japanese records captured after the war revealed why. That Betty was evacuating senior staff officers from northern Luzon to Formosa. The exact passenger manifest was never recovered, but intelligence assessments suggest that at least one general officer was aboard, possibly more. The evacuation was part of Japan's strategic withdrawal from the Philippines. Critical personnel were being extracted before American ground forces could capture them. Shomo did not know any of this when he attacked. He saw formation of enemy aircraft and made a tactical decision based on the information available. But the consequences of his decision extended beyond the 10 aircraft destroyed that morning. The loss of those staff officers disrupted Japanese command coordination in the Philippines for critical weeks. Decisions that should have been made were delayed. Orders that should have been issued were not. The ripple effects contributed to the acceleration of American ground operations in ways that historians can estimate but never precisely measure. One pilot. 6 minutes. Consequences that reached far beyond what anyone anticipated. That is the nature of decisive action in warfare. Small moments produce large outcomes. Individual choices cascade into strategic impacts. William Shomo made a choice on the morning of January 11, 1945. He chose to attack when every reasonable calculation said he should flee. That choice killed enemy aircraft. That choice eliminated enemy personnel. That choice disrupted enemy operations. That choice demonstrated tactics that saved American lives for years afterward. All of it flowed from one decision made in seconds by a pilot who had waited 3 years for the chance to make it. From an undertaker in Pittsburgh with a dream of aerial combat, to a reconnaissance pilot frustrated by obsolete aircraft and missions that never encountered the enemy, to an ace achieved in 6 minutes of perfect execution, to a Medal of Honor recipient whose tactics influenced generations of fighter pilots. William Shomo's journey proves that extraordinary results come from ordinary people who refuse to stop preparing, refuse to stop believing, and refuse to let opportunity pass when it finally arrives. He destroyed 8 enemy aircraft in his career. He flew over 250 combat missions. He served his country for 27 years. But the number that defines his legacy is 6. 6 minutes that changed everything. 6 minutes that proved what patient preparation could achieve. 6 minutes that turned a forgotten reconnaissance pilot into a legend. If you know a story like this, a forgotten hero whose achievements deserve recognition, share it in the comments. History is filled with William Shomo's men and women who changed the course of events through courage and skill that the world never properly acknowledged. Subscribe to discover more of these hidden stories. Because somewhere in the archives, in the dusty records and forgotten files, there are tales that deserve to be told, and telling them is how we honor those who served. William Shomo waited 3 years for his 6 minutes of glory. Some heroes wait forever. The least we can do is remember the ones we know about, the ones whose stories survived, the ones who proved that patience, preparation, and courage can combine into something the world calls impossible. Until one person does it, and then the impossible becomes history.